Yeah, I love working with mixed teams because I find that women provide so much more empathy and a different perspective to men in those teams. That may sound a little bit strange, but when you're working on data science problems, very often you have to include societal impacts. And so it's really important that you do not just have men or just white men in those teams, because they tend to look at issues from their own particular point of view. And the questions that we're trying to answer in data science, they are important to everybody. And 50% of the world is female, and we're not all white. And so it's really, really good to have that input directly when we're formulating questions, also when we're designing approaches to answer questions, and otherwise it will be too narrow. And we may be hurting parts of the population. In teams, it's also very fun to have women because the atmosphere tends to be a little bit less competitive, much more relaxed. People tend to be a little bit more aware of how everybody's feeling. I used to work in only with men for many years. I was the only woman. And in recent years, actually, more women have entered the field, and I can't tell you how much I enjoy it. Everybody relaxes just a little bit more, and there's less, I would say there's less competitive behavior. Avoiding bias every time we address a scientific problem has always been difficult. Let's put that first, and in the past we relied on human judgment in making decisions only. And now in many fields, artificial intelligence, machine learning is used in addition to human judgment, or sometimes even solely. And of course bias creeps in there too. Whether or not bias creeps in more than before, it's really hard to say, but we're very concerned about this, because whereas before you knew the person who was making the decisions and you could appeal to them and talk to them and try to understand a little bit better why certain decisions were made, with artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms, it's become very impersonal. And sometimes we don't even understand quite why we come up with certain decisions. We don't really understand how an algorithm works, nor how predictions are really made. And then we don't always realize what bias may have crept in the data that we're collecting. And actually finding that out, what are biases that come into the data we gather, what are biases that have come into the way that we're asking questions, the way that we're approaching answering questions, is exceedingly difficult. And I think for that reason we have to be so careful adopting AI algorithms or data science techniques in critical decisions, in the judicial system and in medicine, all of those areas. We just have to be very careful and look 10 times before we do this. Luckily, the world has become more aware. So even 5 years ago, there was such an incredible urge to apply AI everywhere we saw fit, and people were overexcited, and it was a bit of a hype. And I think we've learned that artificial intelligence algorithms are flawed. Of course, everything we do as humans is flawed, so also the algorithms that we are designing. And people have become more aware, so we talk about it more often than not. Predicting unintended consequences of these algorithms is very tough. So we need to test them. We need to make sure that the algorithms that we use are reproducible, meaning that if we use them, on like data, in like populations, that the outcomes are similar. And we should always compare and contrast with human judgment. I am not somebody who's very keen on using only artificial intelligence algorithms for really important decisions, but I can see AI playing a role as a check. So for example, in judicial systems, you can have judges making decisions. You can also see what decisions an AI algorithm may make based on the judgments of judges over many years, and then compare and contrast and say, hey, this is funny. You're approaching this differently than an AI algorithm would. Why? Let's think about this some more. So in other words, it could help with checks and balances, which could only be positive. Women in Data Science started as a conference only, but we very quickly saw that there was just such an incredible need of women all over the world to be engaged with each other and to learn from each other and to support each other. So we are extremely keen on broadening WIDS. We sometimes sort of joke and say WIDS is no longer just a conference, it's a movement. We are gradually expanding, so we added a datathon to get more engagement also before WIDS, a couple of months before WIDS, which has been super fun. We started a podcast series where we're interviewing women who've appeared at WIDS or who we think are really great role models here in Silicon Valley or elsewhere in the world. And that these podcast series are produced throughout the year. We're now looking to activities with high schools and maybe middle schools to get girls a little bit younger. But we're really keen on making WIDS a year-round activity. How exactly we're going to do that it's not clear. There are many organizations that we can collaborate with, which is exciting. There's the Women in Machine Learning and Data Science, for example, the meetups, and they meet on regular basis. There are companies that have year-round events that we could collaborate with. But we'd actually would love your suggestions. So if you have any suggestions, send me an email. I started my career, I always think in mathematics and computational mathematics at a very young age. So at the age of 15 and 16, I chose mathematics as my main interest, also in high school. And I was one of the very few girls at the time. And ever since then, I've really always been one of few girls, or the first woman in any department that I've worked, and for a long time also the only one. It's been tough at times, I think as a woman, when you are different, when there are not many other women, people notice you. That can be positive, but it can also lead to more scrutiny. So I always felt I was scrutinized more than men, that a lot of people were critical towards me. If I made a mistake, everybody knew about it. If I did something good, it wasn't always acknowledged, and that is tough. It's tough to go through and always stay confident and know that despite a lack of encouragement, which I certainly missed encouragement when I was younger, to keep going and have the self-confidence to be okay. It got a lot easier for me over the years. I've always had a lot of male friends. Sometimes people joke so that I'm a bit of an alpha male myself, sharing a sense of humor with my male colleagues, and I decided to make it easy for my male colleagues as well, and not easy in that I was accepting bad behavior. I never accepted bad behavior, but I also tried not to be too sensitive either, and to understand that when you're entering as a woman in a group of only men, for them the dynamics also changes, and for them they also have to find comfort with this and change their behavior, adjust a little bit. So I've always tried to help them with it. And then the other thing I've done, which has helped me a lot, is I never make anything personal, and I don't try to take things too personal either. So if somebody makes a comment at me that could be a little bit insulting or discouraging, I try to say, that's not really me, that often he is responding to. And very often people make bad comments when they feel a little bit threatened or they don't really understand how to deal with you. So I try to see the positive of everything. Being an only woman also has advantages, and there's no way around it. People see you more, and in academic career, that's also important. So I never had to worry about people saying, Margot, who is she? I knew that people would know who I was and would be aware of what I did. And I've gotten some benefits of being a woman. Sometimes you get the benefit of the doubt a little bit. Sometimes you get the opposite. You lose because of doubt. But I think overall it has balanced itself out. I've had some difficulties. Now Me Too is a really big thing, and I've certainly encountered Me Too moments where I was propositioned by people, or I was groped, or I was expected to sleep my way to success. Never did that. But it's tough when you are in a situation where you feel people are abusing their power. And when I was younger, especially when I was a student, that would help. It was often a little tough to get through. I have also been in situations where I was really insulted, and in hindsight, those situations are kind of funny. I'll tell you one story. I was once in Cambridge in the UK, invited to a college, and the first thing that a professor asked me, who was at the high table in college with me, was who I was with. Professor could not imagine that I was actually the guest of honor. And when I said, well, nobody, I'm here, I was invited. And he then turned to me and asked me that he was very surprised that California universities hired blonde women to be professors. And so I turned to him and I said, don't worry, the blonde is artificial. I get highlights. He said, don't worry, it's fake blonde. Really I'm a brunette, so everything's okay with the world. And, you have to respond sometimes in those ways to enjoy yourself a little bit more than you otherwise would. Another time I was in a group with men, and one of the men said, Margot, it's always so easy to work with you, much easier than with other women, but now I understand why. It got to me. I see it now. I said, because you're really just a man with boobs. And I'm thinking to myself, my goodness, so I started laughing and I said, well, I suppose I'm happy you noticed, but what can I say in such cases? You can either see it as something really funny and a little bit embarrassing for them, and that's how I've dealt with it. Overall, I think it's still great. And I'm so happy more women are entering the field, and together we can make a big difference.